This is the story of the Dibden and Applemore Railway Company Limited, written by T.J. Blundell. In 1860, Great Britain was building railways as independent railway companies were set up all over the UK. This is the story of one such railway. Applemore and Dibden were two small isolated hamlets in 1860, both within a couple of miles of each other. Unfortunately, for horses and carts to carry goods between the two hamlets was very difficult, and often could take as much as up to an hour to transport cargo from Applemore to Dibden. This was mainly due to the very uneven dirt tracks and steep hills leading up to Applemore. Goods often consisted of milk, clay, coal and people. The local council of the time decided that something was required to transport these goods items quicker, instead of having to waste time with their horses and carts. The horses were mucky and the carts were getting old and were renowned for having wheels fall off without any warning. The council originally thought a new, more even dirt track was needed, but after much consideration the idea was scrapped because of the steep hills that the track would encounter that the horse and carts were finding very difficult to climb. One early morning of January 8th, 1861, a notice was posted to all the residents of Applemore and Dibden, outlining the construction of a new railway line between Applemore and Dibden. Within the end of the same day, letters of anger and protest were shoved through the local council's letterbox, but were ignored, as the council had agreed for the construction of the line. After about a year, in March 1862, the line's construction had been completed, and the locals had come round to the idea that a railway wasn't such a bad idea. But there were no trains. The line's builders had not considered how to get the trains they had ordered onto the railway tracks. Another 2 years passed and still no trains ran. The council thought they'd have need to close the line again. Then, in 1864, a letter appeared in the local council's office. It was a suggestion from a local member of the community suggesting that they should sell their current stock and transport the materials needed to the railway, and build a temporary shed to build a locomotive and some coaches and wagons. The idea was taken up and the stock of the line was built in a shed at Applemore. Now, before we go on to the rolling stock of the line, I'll tell you the stations along the route. There were 4 stations along the line: Dibden, Challenger Halt, Cygnus Halt and Applemore. Dibden was the main station along the line, yet oddly no pictures exist at Dibden. Today the station site is a lot narrower and was a daycare centre up until its closure in 2006. Challenger Halt was a long, narrow halt, built adjacent to the dirt track known as Challenger Lane. Today no evidence exists of the halt. Cygnus Halt was a very small halt, and it was a request halt, meaning that trains stopped there on request of either the passenger or a farmer requesting to load goods, often by giving the driver of the train some form of hand signal on the platform. Today, Cygnus Halt is the only remaining piece of infrastructure in the line, yet cannot be seen thanks to very thick undergrowth. Finally, there was Applemore, the line's second main station. Both main stations had a run-round loop, but they were both removed in 1885 due to their lack of use. Also at Applemore was a shed, where all the stock could be kept under shelter. Today no remains of the station exist, and now the station site lies on the site of Applemore Health and Leisure Centre car park. The line also had 4 pieces of rolling stock. The line had one small green saddle tank locomotive with no name or number, though later in life was numbered. This engine was an excellent steamer, and worked all the services right up to the line's closure. If the loco was taken out of service for any reason, a small Victorian tender locomotive, ex-Stockton and Darlington Railway, took its place. This engine usually remained in the back of the sheds at Applemore. There was also a Victorian railway carriage, which was painted in crimson and cream colours, and was very well looked after. There was also a Lyle and Sons railway wagon, used for transporting all the goods of the line. Finally, there was an ex-Stockton and Darlington railway wagon converted for use as a brake van on the line. The railway was finally opened in 1865 and the railway began operation. Initially, there was never very much traffic on the line, but there were enough passengers and goods to keep the railway going. This pattern continued up until 1877, when suddenly passenger numbers exploded. The line could not cope, and the railway began to collapse under the pressure of how many passengers used the railway a day. They decided that there needed to be 2 trains running and installed run-round loops and new platforms at both halts. But when they went to use their old tender engine, the boiler exploded 2 months into use, and the engine was beyond repair. It was decided after this incident to buy a makeshift loco and a new coach to cope with higher passenger numbers. Their coach was this time an ex-Liverpool and Manchester railway coach, left in its original colours for the passengers' interest. The makeshift locomotive was an ex-tractor mounted to a purpose-built railway chassis. It wasn't a very good runner, but it did the job intended. All good things eventually come to an end, and by 1885 passenger numbers had dipped back to what they were before. The line subsequently removed the passing loops at all of the stations and sold their makeshift locomotive and Liverpool and Manchester coach to an agricultural railway in Kent. The line railway continued to run through the rest of the 1880s and 1890s. Then came 1900. A new local railway company were trying to submit plans to build a railway in Fawley. In 1903 their railway was authorised and built. The Fawley, Hythe and Marchwood Light Railway Company was their name, and they wanted to buy the Applemore and Dibden Railway for their own use. The Applemore and Dibden Railway refused to sell out their company for another, and subsequently passengers found a more efficient service to Fawley, meaning passenger numbers dropped, and so did profit for the railway. Also, agriculture was increasing. With the railway's loss of profit, they did not have the money to build a livestock wagon. Later, in 1903, was another very big hit and blow for the railway. A Mr. Henry Fembleson authorised construction for a narrow-gauge railway, purpose-built for the movement of animals. This railway was to be known as the Mendip and Farleyvale, later named Fairview, Light Railway Company, and became the Applemore and Dibden Railway's biggest rival in the railway's final years. But on January the 1st of 1905, the final notice of closure was put up. The notice said it was due to close within 12 months, and the final closure date was put up on the 12th of July 1905, as October the 31st, 1905. In the railway's last 2 summers there was a heat wave, and passengers flocked to travel behind its small green saddle tank engine. Cygnus Halt also no longer was a request halt. On October the 31st, the train had a special last train to Dibden headboard, and all the stations were decorated in flags. And the final 6:15 p.m. service from Dibden to Applemore was given a fond farewell by M&F's number 1 stalwart and number 2 founder. The railway officially closed at 7:16 p.m. on October the 31st, 1905. Dibden Station was completely demolished by 1906, although the building was moved to Hythe and repainted into a town hall, later demolished in 1934. You may think that's the end of the story, but there is another chapter to the railway. In 1939, war broke out between England and Germany. The War Department requisitioned the remaining part of the route up to the disused Challenger Halt and connected the railway to the Fawley branch line. The railway collected ammunition and troops at Applemore, which arrived by lorry, and transported them down to Fawley. 2 ex-Southern Railway mineral wagons were used, as well as an ex-Northeastern Railway brake van. There was also a War Department locomotive used, an austerity saddle tank 060ST named St John's Hill. When the war ended, the tracks were lifted once again, and all the stock sold to the other railways. The track bed later got built on in the 1980s for a new housing estate, and Challenger Halt was earlier demolished in 1966 due to the Beeching Report, even though the railway was not operational. Applemore was built on for a car park for a new leisure centre, and all that remains is Cygnus Halt, under all the undergrowth. In late 2012, planning permission was granted to restore Cygnus Halt to its former glory, and work has begun to clear the undergrowth. This was the fictional story of the Applemore and Dibden Light Railway Company, written by T.J. Blundell I.